Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Licensing Committee. My name is Peter Fisher. I shall be chairing, and I have officers to my left. If they would introduce themselves, please.
I'm Elisa Penderade, Environmental and Leisure Business Support Manager. In
Becky Parker, Democratic Services Officer.
Claire Shopland, Democratic Services Officer.
Emma Hallams, Democratic Services Officer.
Right, thank you very much. We're not expecting a fire alarm this morning, so I'm sure that we'll all be departing in good order should the fire alarm go off. And I'm sure we've all got our phones switched off, so we'll straight into business. Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Councillors Beattie, Blaithwaite, Mancini, Boyle and Withington.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest? Items of urgent business? Excellent. Right. We'll ask then Elisa to talk us or walk us through perhaps the permanent pavement licensing policy. Over to you, Elisa.
Thank you, Chair. The permanent pavement licensing provisions of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 came into force on the 31st of March 2024. Prior to that, they were covered on a temporary basis under the Business and Planning Act of 2020, which was designed to make it easier and smoother for local businesses to obtain a pavement licence, thereby supporting their activities and improving economic fluidity. The permanent pavement licensing policy, the recommendation is to approve and adopt it with effect from the 1st of April 2025. The policy essentially states that we will process applications and provide pavement licenses within our district, and we have new powers now to enforce and remove on furniture which is in breach of a policy. Prior to that, we did not have any enforcement powers at all. That was done by Highways at County Council. There are also new caps on the fees that we can charge. The maximum fee for a new application is £500 and a renewal is £350. In truth, when we're doing full cost recovery at Norfolk District Council, our fees are likely to be very similar to what they are now, which is £80 per year. And it's a 2-year licence. So in average, about £160 for the new application. When we've worked up full cost recovery, there's very little difference with renewal, perhaps £5 or £7.50, something like that. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. I think you've had a chance to read the paper and the policy.
Have we got any questions? I'll ask one then. The £160, does that give us enough wiggle room for anything that's difficult that we can't do easily within a couple of hours? We're happy that there'll not be too many cases that fall outside that and we'll put the costs up.
So we are doing a piece of work at the moment to streamline our processes. The full cost recovery assessment was done on the basis of the processes that we have in place now, which are not the most efficient as we plan them to be. There is sufficient room within that process. On average, we would expect it might take an hour of officer time. We've built in the difficult cases, which we sometimes have. Processing these types of applications is not normally the bread and butter of these organisations, and so we do sometimes get a lot of questions. There is a bit of to and froing about providing the correct pieces of information, particularly maps, planning, site locations, those kinds of things, risk assessments, and so we have built that in to our calculations.
Kevin first, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, got any idea of how many businesses it will affect? And I take it it's sort of those businesses that might run hospitality that will put chairs and tables on the pavements. Is there a sort of, they've got to make an application? Is there a timeline when, because they might be doing it now and then suddenly this is imposed on them? Is there a timeline in terms of allowing them to make an application and still continue to use the pavement?
Thank you. So they have always had to have pavement licenses. So this is really a shift in who is administering those pavement licenses. Where they're in breach, we feel as though that will be a positive arrangement for us to be able to then enforce. The difficulty we had was obviously being the administrators of the system, but not the enforcers of it. And this solidifies that. So we can now take action where we couldn't possibly before, which might have undermined our processes.
You want to come back, Kevin?
Yeah, just one other question I had is are these fees in line with other districts?
Thank you. We find they are actually very favourable by comparison to other districts. When we look at, say, for example, South Norfolk, their new application is in the region is over £350 for a new application, and ours would be 160. And also, as I might have mentioned before, it's almost exactly the same as it is presently, so there'll be very little change.
Councillor Fitzpatrick?
Yeah, thanks. No, I'm glad the fee is set at low. I mean, and not, I think it's always a temptation when there's a maximum fee to go somewhere near that and say, well, giving you £10 off, and I haven't done well. So I think it's really good that you're doing it at the lowest point of cost recovery. I'm generally in favour of stuff on the pavement. When I go to France or Germany or Belgium, there's pavement cafes, but what always strikes me is how neat and tidy all this. And I quite often hear parts of the country, I'm not suggesting in North Norfolk for a moment, but it can look really messy. Stuff pops up in the pavement here, there and everywhere. So I think this is a real opportunity to encourage people to get licensed, to work with the council, to have neat, tidy stuff that is actually a benefit to the business, but also to the area as well. So I think it's a good regime. And I'm not always in favour of licensing everything, but if you're going to do licensing, I think this is sensible licensing, so I support it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Adams.
I've got a few questions. I hope that's all right. So, just in terms of the enforcement powers, it obviously doesn't replace any of the existing highways legislation around obstructing the highway. So I just wanted to make sure, say there was a scenario that was unrelated to a retail premises, say a motorhome that had parked up and had put a gas bottle and set of deck chairs on a footway. There's not provision to actually move on the motorhome, but there is an issue with them placing furniture at the moment in terms of current highways legislation. But would the responsibility be placed on us rather than other authorities for doing something like? I just wanted to make sure we weren't taking on more than just the street furniture in association with businesses.
Thank you. Yes, you're right on that fact. Yeah, we are only enforcing on breaches of pavement licensing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, there could be scenarios where someone's put something on the pavement and they're not necessarily a shop owner or a cafe, etc. Second question, I suppose related to that is, I presume there's no impediment on highway street works and road works access to utilities as a result of this. That presumably takes precedence in every circumstance where someone needs to get under said street furniture to access utilities, etc.
Yes, you're right about that. There would have to be an order where there was they would have to move their furniture out of the way for that.
Yeah. Okay. I was just a bit concerned about whether any of that could rebound onto us, but I suppose we'll learn that in the longer term. The last question I have is in relation to the consultees. It just seems a very extensive list, and I was a bit concerned it might cause some delays. I think it said 14 days turnaround. I mean, for instance, why consult town and parish councils? In a sense, they probably won't even be able to give you a response in 14 days because of their governance. They might not have meetings in that period of time and planning. Is that list set in statute, or do you think we should be perhaps considering a sort of smaller list of consultees in that respect?
I would tend to agree with you, especially with how often and infrequently perhaps some parish and town councils are meeting.
Yeah.
is not set in statute. We are supposed to consider security, and we certainly would have to talk to highways. It would make sense for us to talk to our peers in environmental protection and also in planning. Outside of that, I think probably there would be some room to have them as optional
Okay.
consultees.
Right, fair enough. Yeah, I think that would probably be a good idea personally, just an optional consultee, because if they don't reply, we can't let that delay process. I think in this instance, it's too short a turnaround time, and yeah, as we were saying, the parish councils don't meet well, even we don't meet that regularly, you know, to agree as such a response. But yeah, that I think would be a helpful sort of change personally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, just a couple of questions from me to give a shout out to disability rights campaigners and people that will complain to us inevitably that their access along pavements is impeded. So what criteria do we apply to minimise the effect on those residents in our community who are elderly, using motor scooters or you know, other disability aids? Just a second question as well about notification. We have a very useful system in planning where if an application is received, the ward member is informed at the very outset so that we know what inquiries we're likely to receive about a particular application in a particular area. So I see in the papers that notices of application, etc., will be publicised. Can I just ask how they're going to be publicised for public viewing? You know, what the standard procedure is, and in particular, how elected members will be notified of applications that are pending?
Thank you very much for your questions. I'll cover the first one about disability first. The legislation itself has taken account very much of disabled users of the road along with all other users. There is a minimum requirement for, if it's possible, for two motorised scooters to pass each other after the boundary of the pavement boundaried area for the licensed area. If that's not practicable, then they say one motorised scooter and an ambulant walker. And so there is a distance that we would not grant a licence for those reasons. In terms of publicising any applications, we are looking, I might have mentioned we're looking to improve our processes. One of those is to have applications submitted online, and those would automatically generate a notification to certain people. Members, of course, could be one of those people, and they would also get advertised on the internet so that everybody could see them. We're also going to publish them in reception so that people who perhaps don't have access to the internet can also view them, and the premises themselves would have to advertise at their place of work.
Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, my question, it might be covered in here, but it's just about liability in terms of, you know, someone putting chairs, tables, umbrellas, whatever on those pavements. Liability insurance is clearly down to the individual, I take it. And any damage to the pavement at all?
That's a good question about damage to the pavement, but they do have to show us a certificate of liability. So we would have proof they are covered and insured for that. And I would imagine that they would be responsible for any damage caused as a result of their work on under the pavement licence.
Yes, something I was reminded of while we were talking was that I think somewhere in this document it talks about putting some sort of fencing round the tables and chairs, and obviously that has got to meet our specifications. And also, I'm sure we'll get complaints if it's getting quite onerous for people to walk up and down. I've got Stave Street in my ward where there are a lot of tables and chairs out, and I think there's been quite an increase since the pandemic of those sort of things where we were allowed people to put stuff out, but it also says they've got to be removable each night, and they've got to be not garden furniture, but specifically good, reasonable furniture. So I think we're covered in most aspects, but there will be places, and I know I've got one where there are timber seating outside a pub on the quay at Wales, and that will have to be sorted under this licensing agreement. Have we got any more questions? Are we happy to go to a vote? Right, the recommendation is to approve and adopt the permanent pavement licensing policy with effect from the 1st of April 2025. Have we got a proposer and a seconder? Everybody. All those in favour? Excellent. So we've got, it's passed, we've got nothing to exclude the press and public for, and I've come to the end of my morning's work. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll close the meeting at 10:18.